In the fall of 2019, I got this buck on camera. A chocolate-horned public land bruiser buck had now come into my perennial scrape right near one of my rifle hunting stands. What really concerned me about these photos was the fact that he was alerted to my camera being there. As you can see in these photos, he's looking around, he's listening, he's smelling, and then eventually comes over to my camera, investigates it, and is made 100% aware that there's some sort of foreign object in the tree there. He actually comes in to smell the camera itself. So at this point, this buck has smelled my camera, he's heard it, and he's seen it. Now, interestingly, the buck didn't take off, but he did come in to do a full investigation. So, do trail cameras spook deer? Do they scare them? Will they ruin your hunting spot? Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and that's what I want to do in this video. Now, as I've pondered this topic, I've done a lot of research on it about the impacts that trail cameras have on whitetails, and there's some interesting articles out there on it. And you'll speak with some guys, and I used to have this same mindset that, you know, when a big buck is in full rut, his neck is swelled out, he's got one thing on his mind, he is just bulldozing through the woods. He doesn't care about those trail cameras. He's not looking side to side. I've heard a lot of guys say that, and I used to feel that same way, and I think that's true. That during the peak of the rut, during the frenzy of it all, a big buck probably won't pay that much attention to a camera off to the side in its periphery. But there's a couple reasons why I changed my opinion on that. The first is the peak of the rut only lasts a short period of time in the context of the entire fall when I have my cameras out there running. So there's a lot of preseason where that buck isn't in full rut and is far more alert. The other reason is because I'm not only trying to not spook a big buck, I'm also trying not to spook does with this trail camera. That's something really important to keep in mind. A lot of times we get so hung up on that big buck that that's all we're focused on. But what about those does that are coming through, checking out a perennial scrape or a mock scrape? What about those does that are walking by on that trail or hitting that water hole? If we're alerting a big, smart, old doe that there's a camera here, we're leaving our scent all over it, checking it way too often, spooking that doe out of that area frequently, she's gonna start to avoid that area. And if she's avoiding it when she has that big buck behind her, you may have just cost yourself an opportunity at that buck in the fall. A lot of the nicer bucks that I've encountered while bow hunting have been on a doe. So I'm trying to court these does. I'm trying to keep these does unaware every bit as much as I am trying to keep a big buck unaware of my presence. So a couple things to keep in mind as we talk about this list. So with that, let's dive right into my list of 3 ways that you should be minimizing or eliminating altogether the interactions that the deer are having with your trail cameras. I'm going to list these in order of importance, so stick around for the last one. I think you guys will like it. The first deadly sin or mistake that you can make with putting out a trail camera is not having the right angle and distance. The right angle and distance matter to where that deer is going to be. Now, there are certain areas that funnel deer more than others. A deer trail, a water hole, a food plot, a mock scrape. Where you expect that deer to be, make sure that you're keeping your camera back far enough. I don't think 25 to 30 feet is too far. I try to keep my cameras back in that distance, that zone, just to cut down on their periphery, their sense of hearing, their sense of smell, and that vision in the periphery. And the angle is probably more important in my opinion. If you've got a mock scrape, you want to have that scrape pointed at it, the camera pointed at the scrape, so that when that buck is working the scrape, he's looking away from the camera. All right, I just got my trail camera hung. There's a mock scrape behind the camera that way. And this is just one of the ways that I'll put a camera up, especially on public land. This will do a couple things. It gets it so that it's far enough away from the deer that it's not hearing that click, and hopefully it's not catching those infrared glow beads in its periphery. The other thing it does is it gets it up high enough. You can see it here. I'm reaching, this is as high as I can reach right here. You can see that I got a safety cable on it, or a theft lock cable on it. Again, just public land. It's an unfortunate reality of where I hunt that I have to do that. But the other thing this will do is It keeps it up kind of out of sight, out of mind, way up high, so that other hunters probably won't see this either. I bet a lot of them will just walk right by this area and they won't even see my camera. But that's just kind of an added benefit. The main reasons why I do it this way is just so that not only that big buck doesn't see it, and I've got my stand 20 yards away right over there, 20 yards from the mock scrape. I just cannot risk a buck seeing this camera, hearing this camera. So it has that benefit, but also for the does. Those big, smart does, I get more of those staring at my trail cameras than I do the big bucks, especially during the rut. Those bucks don't seem to pay as much attention to these cameras as the does, but you know, when we get into that peak of the bell curve, as we come into the actual breeding phase of the rut, and those big, the oldest age class bucks are locked down on a doe, I cannot have that doe spooked a month before in mid-October, early October. If she saw this camera or heard it or smelled my hands on it, it's just so unnatural, such an unnatural thing in this bedding area. I just cannot risk that doe avoiding this spot now, because again, my stand is right here. This is where I'm hunting. So if I blow this spot out with this camera, I just blew my whole chances, I blew my chance for the whole season in a way. Now when bucks are alone and cruising, little different story, but you know, a lot of times when I encounter a buck, it's on a doe. So I'm trying to appeal to the does around here as much as I am the bucks, especially during that rut time frame. So this is just a really standard, typical public land set for me. Way up high on a tree like this. I am probably, I bet 40 feet from the mock scrape, back behind the camera that way. And I like it that way. When those infrared bulbs are going off, I don't want that buck or doe at nighttime to see this. This is just a really good way to stay stealthy. All right, I do have one small favor to ask. If you're enjoying the video so far or getting anything out of it, would you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already? That helps me out. So again, the angle and the distance matter. The way you position that camera, perpendicular to a deer trail, pointing to a mock scrape so that the deer is facing away from it. If it's a water hole, where are those deer coming up to take their drink, and make sure that the camera's back behind them. So that angle is something that I'm always thinking about. I don't want that deer to be walking down a trail, and if there's a slight bend in the trail, put the camera right there so it's facing straight down the trail. I don't do that. I put my cameras perpendicular to the trail. I have a lot fewer turned heads looking at my camera when I do that. The second deadly sin or mistake that folks make with these trail cameras is checking them too frequently. Now this might sound a little bit cliche, but think of the bigger picture. You know, when not only are you leaving scent on that camera, but oftentimes these cameras are on a mock scrape right near one of my bow hunting or rifle hunting stands, or a perennial scrape. These are sacred areas to a deer. You know, it seems like these whitetails have certain zones that they live their lives in. You know, if they're out by a highway, you know, eating hay in an alfalfa field out by a busy highway, they'll almost seem unbothered by cars or human activity. You know, they're used to it in that zone. Out in that big ag field, they're used to a farmer, they're used to the sound of ATVs, tractors. That's a zone that they feel comfortable, and it's familiar to them to hear human activity, to smell human scent, hear dogs barking, car doors slamming near a home. They're used to that. That's a certain zone that they have stored away in their mind. Contrast that with a zone that's, say, their sacred bedding area, where you're now going to try to hunt them in a morning hunt in the rut. They're not used to human scent back there. They're not used to the sound of barking dogs or whatever it may be, the sound of you walking through the woods or your scent. And so every time you do that, to go check that camera, just think of the impact you're having on that area, the scent you're leaving behind, and the intrusion that you have on that sacred zone where those deer are not expecting you to be. Now, the third deadly sin or mistake folks make is not using that delay feature on their camera appropriately. One way that I have found to reduce deer spooking from a trail camera is to set that delay longer than 3 minutes. So I'll set mine to 4 or 5 minutes. So when that buck comes in, or that doe, if they do hear your camera go off the first time or catch those IRs in their periphery, they'll stop and turn to look at your camera. If it sits there black for 5 minutes, that deer's probably going to move on and flick its tail and feel comfortable to proceed. If, however, you have your delay set at 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or less, even a few seconds, if that deer initially hears or sees your camera, it's going to stop and look at it, and then it's going to sit there, and that camera's going to go off. Those IRs are going to keep taking pictures of that deer over and over, and that's really going to make that deer aware of the camera's presence. A lot of times I'll have cameras on funnel trails on public land during the peak of the rut, just some sort of topographical funnel, you know, between two big ponds, or between a clear cut and a beaver pond, or something like that, where there's, you know, a confluence of deer trails. And during the peak of the rut, you know, bucks are really going through the woods, you know, head down. They're after those does. Even does seem to be moving authoritatively through the woods. The bucks have been harassing them. If you have that trail camera perpendicular to a trail, and that camera goes off and the deer stops and looks at it, it's probably going to wait a few seconds and then turn back and keep going, and probably just chalk up the sound of that camera going off to you know, a tree creaking, or a stick, or any number of natural sounds that they hear in the woods. Now, that's opposed to if you have your delay set so short, say 3 seconds or so, or 10 seconds or 20, when that deer stops, if he hears the camera, that camera is going to continue to go off and take pictures of it over and over, and it's going to know your camera is there at that point. And then it might start to avoid that area, or it might start to use a different trail to go around that camera because it had that experience. So using the delay feature on your camera, in my opinion, is really important. It's something I do on all my cameras now. I'll set them on a 2 or 3 picture burst to get those couple 2 or 3 photos as the deer's coming in. And then if the deer hears it or sees it, it'll stop and look, and then the camera sits black and doesn't move, it doesn't make a sound, it doesn't take a picture. The deer feels calm again, and it resumes its normal activity. Let's go back to that big public land bruiser buck that I started the video with. Do you think that buck came back into my mock scrape? Well, as the season went on, I got more and more deer using that perennial scrape. There were does using it, even some timber wolves came through, a number of other bucks came in and used it. And the truth of the matter is that big buck, he did come back. He came back 2 more times. But what's really interesting is the second time that that buck returned to hit that perennial scrape, he looked right at the camera. He's the only buck out of all of those bucks to do so. I found that really interesting. That buck had an experience on October 7th when he first came through, where he saw that camera, he came in and investigated, he knew it was there. When he came back 1 month later, he remembered that that camera was there, and he turned his head and looked right at the camera. My dad ended up killing that buck about a half mile away that gun season. It was a beautiful buck. Now, because I had my trail camera over this perennial scrape, was that the difference maker in me not shooting that buck that fall? In other words, if I hadn't put my camera on that perennial scrape at all, do you think there's a chance that that buck may have felt more comfortable coming into it and I may have killed him? We'll never know. I tend to think that's not the case. So when we really look at the big picture of all this, it's tough to say whether or not a trail camera is going to ruin your hunting spot. I think in most cases they don't. And this scenario from the fall of 2019, or this one perennial scrape, in my mind proves that it did not ruin my spot. Now, did it affect my chances? Possibly. It may have. If someone were to ask me, can trail cameras spook deer? I would say with 100% confidence that yes, they can and do spook deer on occasion, because I've gotten the photos to prove it, of a doe taking off, a buck seeing my camera and sprinting away in the next photo. I've witnessed it, I've seen the cameras, I have the trail camera pictures to prove it. So It's a tool that in my mind it can help you or really hurt you. How I approach it is I try to follow the principles of these 3 ways that you can reduce or eliminate altogether deer interactions with your camera, because to me it's that important that I really am careful with that camera, and I don't take a hunting spot and make it worse than if I didn't have a camera there in the first place. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. What do you think? Do cameras spook deer? Have you had spots ruined by deer? What have you found with the cameras that you're running? Let me know in the comments down below, and until next time, you guys, take care.